Good afternoon. It's Chris Hale again, coming to you live from Chicago. I was on Facebook the other day, actually, and I was noticing somebody was saying that, or questioning whether or not being a Jehovah's Witness and suffering the way we did could be reason to have, or could they be diagnosed with PTSD? That's post-traumatic stress syndrome. PTSD is a mental health condition triggered by a terrifying event or remembering a terrifying event. Symptoms could actually include flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, and uncontrollable thoughts about the actual event. So the question I have, is it really post-traumatic stress syndrome, or are we ex-Jehovah's Witnesses really just having difficulty in coping with the things that we endured during our time in that claustrophobic religion? But here's a question for you guys. What if you were to keep reminding yourself of the events of the past in question? For example, suppose you were physically abused, like maybe you were married to an abusive man, or a man was married to an abusive woman, and he beat you or she beat you on a regular basis every day, called you names, destroyed your material things, and just overall was abusive to you every single day of your life. And you kept a journal. And what if every single day you referred to that journal, you read your entries and reminded yourself of the physical, the emotional abuse that you suffered at the hands of your significant other, and then you decided, well, you know what, I'm going to share this with the whole world of all my friends on Facebook. And every time you get together with your brother, your sister, or your best buddy, you talk about the abuse you suffered. You pull out the journal and say, look here, on January 1st, 1987, he beat me in the head and put me in the hospital, and I didn't go to work for a month. Or over here, he did this, or over here, she did that. Now that, I would think, would turn into something like post-traumatic stress syndrome, because we're constantly inviting ourselves to relive the horror. So when I'm on Facebook and I'm noticing people that are in the XJW community posting these memes and asking themselves, hey, do you remember this Watchtower article? Do you remember that Awake article? Or do you remember this situation or that situation? Or were you at this convention or that convention? Or do you remember this song that we used to sing, or that song that we used to sing? Or, hey, can anybody explain overlapping generations? Or what's going on with this situation and that? And to me, that's traumatic, because when I look at pictures of old Watchtower Awake magazines, and I look at the old books that we used to study and all that bullshit, it's traumatic to me. And when I think about the Smurfs and how Smurfs were demonized, and in Facebook, people have long conversations about this stuff, and then I ask, so how long have you been out? 20 years? Wow. So you still haven't moved on from this. Why? Perhaps could it be because you keep looking at the same old crap, and what it does is it brings all this stuff back up into your memory, and it sets you back. I know for me, whenever I see these things, whenever I see an old book or even a green New World Translation, it reminds me of my mother or my father punishing me because I didn't answer enough questions at the meeting, or I didn't spend enough time in the ministry, or it just really brings up bad memories. And sometimes these memories haunt my nighttime rest. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you're trying to move ahead in your life, why in God's green earth, this assuming that there is a God, would you go back and regurgitate and that crap? And it's like the dog going back to its vomit. And you go back, you've gotten rid of the stuff out of your system. Now you go back and pick it up again, and you eat it and taste it, and you expect to be able to move on. So when I first came out, I know everybody has to recover in their own way. Everybody has to heal in their own way. And I was a member of all the groups because I had a story to share, and I thought that people supporting my story would help me heal. And it did to some extent. But for me, just looking at all these pictures, it was extremely traumatizing, especially when I was trying to formulate a new truth about the future, a new truth about myself, and I was trying to rebuild my brand, my identity. The last thing I wanted to see was anything that reminded me of the past, because that past was traumatic. So again, each and every person has to do their own thing, but for me and people I talk to, they're asking me questions of, do you remember this doctrine and that doctrine? There's no point in debating doctrine outside the Jehovah's Witness community, because we know they're all lies. Now, here's an interesting thing to consider. If you have not actually read Crisis of Conscience, then you may not really know what I speak of. So it's important for you to understand that the things we learn are not the truth and move on. That's all I have to share today. I hope you all have a great weekend.